Because the truth is, you don't know what you're doing. None of you do. You're all guessing, blending desperation with superstition. You are just doing it more beautifully than most. Tonight, the sash goes on tighter than ever, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. His robes embroidered with gold-threaded dragons, his teeth wine-stained, his questions laced with far too much interest in your waistline. There's a reason your sash is tighter tonight. You probably won't survive this, not if anyone finds out. You're in the village square, where a few stalls lean sideways, held together by twine, prayers, and maybe some mold. You drift past baskets of turnips, lumps of stale bread, and baskets crawling slightly too much for comfort. But your eyes are locked on a wooden tray piled high with golden, oily pastries. A woman in a ragged apron gestures proudly. Fresh from the bakehouse, she croaks. The pastry's crust is uneven, slightly burnt on one corner. Still, you're hungry. Inside, the filling is vaguely meat-like. Sort of. It might be pigeon, or eel, or the leftover scraps of yesterday's goose. No one's entirely sure. The trick in medieval junk food is not asking too many questions. Infections, no bruises, and absolutely no pregnancies. Most food vendors didn't exactly run five-star operations. Hygiene was, let's just say, optional. They'd mix flour, often coarsely ground and still containing bits of stone, with water and lard. Sometimes, if you were lucky, they'd throw in a pinch of herbs. If you were unlucky, you got a splinter from the mixing paddle. Your friend Mailian once joked that every courtesan walks around with a smile and a death wish, wrapped neatly in silk shoes. Bread, the cornerstone of medieval eating, was also a landmine of unintended crunch. Millstones wore down over time, leaving the flour laced with grit and sand. So, yes, your food doubled as a dental hazard. It is no wonder that historians still argue whether most people lost their teeth due to decay or just chewing lunch. These removals were house policy or just the madam's whims. You've seen both. Now, as you wander between stalls, someone yells, "Hot pie!" and shoves a steaming lump into your hands. The crust is tough, and the filling is molten. You burn your tongue. Classic. It tastes faintly of pepper, which was so expensive back then, it was sometimes used instead of currency. This probably means it's not actually pepper. Sometimes you get careless. You move on and watch a woman fry something in a shallow iron pan over an open flame. You squint. Is that dough? She scoops it out, crisp and golden, and hands it to a passing child. There's something comforting in how universally human the pursuit of greasy, crunchy food is. Even in plague-ridden towns with thatched roofs and chamber pots dumped into the street, people still wanted snacks. Remember what it was supposed to help with? Maybe skin tone? A group of barefoot kids runs past, each holding a stick with a lump of dried something skewered on it. Smoked meat? Maybe. Possibly a root vegetable. Or rat? Hard to tell. But it's portable. And that was... Your fingers are sticky now. The woman at the pie stall offers you a cloth that looks like it hasn't been washed since Richard the Lionheart passed through. You politely decline. Instead, you use your sleeve. Authentic. A touch of bitter peach seed. It's a message. Fix this. Quietly. You're not alone in your craving for snackable indulgence. Medieval folk adored their street eats. Monks on errands, visiting pilgrims, bored teenagers. Everyone eventually ended up with something wrapped in bread or bubbling in fat. Historians still argue whether it was meant for prevention or punishment. You brew it at midnight. Still chewing, you pass a man hawking something that smells oddly sweet. He's grinding spices with a wooden mortar and tossing the mixture into honey. It's meant to be smeared on bread or eaten straight from the stick like a medieval lollipop. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove were worth their weight in gold. Literally. But merchants were clever. They'd cut the spices with cheaper fillers. Sometimes historians still argue whether most street food was eaten out of necessity or pleasure. It's hard to separate hunger from desire when your next meal depends on the weather, your landlord's mood, or whether your cow keeled over last night. Snaps closed with an audible thwack the next time you enter the room. You quote walking a tightrope over a pit of secrets. Back at the bakehouse, you see a boy dropping tiny hand pies into an open fire, blackening the bottoms before he yanks them out and dusts them with ash. He grins as he hands one to a noble's servant. That's your cue to try another. Why not? You bite in, expecting warmth, but it's cold and slimy. Mushroom and fish, with raisins, sold downriver. A euphemism you don't ask too much about. Still comma. The hope gnaws at you. One night, Melian sneaks into your room. She's holding a rolled scroll. Inside, a small hand-drawn chart. Phases of the moon, herbal ratios, old notes scribbled in another girl's handwriting. The pregnancy clock, she whispers. Passed down from courtesan to courtesan like a holy text. You hold it like treasure. You suddenly understand why upper-class diets didn't guarantee taste. The mix of sweet and savory was all the rage, possibly because it masked the flavor of questionable ingredients. Combine this with the near-universal use of vinegar and sour wine in recipes, and someone tugs at your sleeve. A small girl holds out a wooden skewer threaded with tiny, round things. Plum balls, she says shyly. You try one. It's dense, chewy, sticky with honey and rolled in crushed walnuts. Surprisingly delicious. A sweet treat that didn't come from a royal kitchen. A rare find. You've already made one mistake. You can't afford another. She skips off, and you lean against a half-broken wall, letting your belly rest. The square bustles on around you. Dogs fighting over scraps, a juggler losing focus, a nun shouting about gluttony. Just another Tuesday. 7. Bodily breach due to willful or negligent pregnancy shall result in immediate dismissal, forfeiture of all earnings, and social demotion. That last part, social demotion, is their polite way of saying you'll be sent to the workhouses. Or worse, the street theaters. Or worse still, marriage. And you, a time-traveling snack connoisseur, are left pondering your medieval appetizer sampler. Your stomach gurgles ominously. It might be the fish raisin thing, or the plum balls, or just 14th century air. Either too poor to afford a respectable wife, or too cruel to care what you were before. So you do what the clever ones before you did. You study your contract and your body like they're two sides of the same trap. Either way, you're not done yet. You've only scratched the surface of history's strangest snack drawer. formalized exclusive patronage. She may request withdrawal if and only if the patron acknowledges paternity in writing. That almost never happens. Most men want courtesans to be illusions, not realities. As soon as real life enters the picture, like morning sickness or swollen ankles, they vanish behind fans and shame dot. Still, there are options. You follow the scent of smoke and sizzling fat to a crooked stall where a burly man flips something round and golden in a shallow iron pan. The oil bubbles furiously, flicking little sparks onto his grimy apron. This, you realize, is a medieval version of deep frying, just without health codes, timers, or fire extinguishers. A signed clause, so she kept the baby and the villa. You watch as he scoops up a glistening, oily disc and hands it to a passing merchant, who bites in with relish despite the smoke billowing from his nostrils. The smell is rich, heavy with pork fat, and you can almost feel your arteries closing just from inhaling it. Welcome to frying in the Dark Ages. She was gone by morning. Her shoes were still by the door. Deep frying was a trick not many mastered because it was risky. Lard and other animal fats were expensive and hard to come by for common folk. So wasting any meant either serious negligence or a deliberate act of rebellion against your diet. But the rewards were worth it. Fried foods crisped deliciously, stayed warm longer, and soaked up flavor like a sponge. The medieval fry cook might not have had a thermometer, but they did have instinct, a prayer, and a near-religious respect for hot fat. Tea ceremony. True, who knows? But the madam keeps her around like a lucky talisman, and that gives Melian protection, and you proximity to protection. You confide in her, not sure yet. You whisper one morning. But the signs. You try to imagine how many times a cook got yelled at for burning the pork rinds or turning the bread too black. And yet the technique persisted, passed down from hearth to hearth, becoming the original junk food method. It's a template, she says, something she's adapted over the years. You blink. You're looking at a blackmail letter disguised as a romantic proposal. Fill in the blanks, get it witnessed, and you've got your safety clause. Only works if they think they'll lose you, Melian murmurs. And only if you're still beautiful when you threaten them. You try not to read into that last part too much. Now, here is a curious tidbit. Some medieval recipes for frying actually called for boiling the fat first and then cooling it, a process that sounds more like early soap making than cooking. The idea was to purify the fat and extend its shelf life, because no one wanted rancid lard spoiling the day's snacks. Smile, extra wide. Drop vague hints. He flinches at the word family, but doesn't run. That's your window. Historians still argue whether frying was a luxury reserved for feasts or a common practice among everyday folk. The evidence is patchy. Sometimes you find detailed recipe manuscripts in noble estates. Sometimes you see peasants bragging about fried bread in legal records. It's a culinary mystery, as slippery as the lard itself. You notice a blackened pot hanging near the fire, crusted with grease from years of use. The man explains that it's a cauldron for frying, usually filled with pork fat or goose grease. Goose grease was the medieval equivalent of fancy olive oil, prized for its flavor and supposed health benefits. You raise an eyebrow at the health benefits part, recalling the fried pastries you just endured. You let the madam see the gold bracelet your patron gave you, the silks, the new ink on your calligraphy practice. You let her assume what she wants. It's a game of layers. You're handed a crisp, oily fritter that's supposed to be some kind of fish cake. It's dense, salty, and oily enough to make your fingers shine. You nibble cautiously, feeling the crunch give way to a chewy interior, a mix of salted herring and rye flour. Not exactly Michelin. Nearby, a group of children chase each other, clutching fried dough sticks they call cakes of the poor. You smile because, despite everything, food was food. You wonder if any of them realize they're eating what would someday evolve into your modern day. The whole scene is smoky and noisy, with people shouting orders and exchanging coins that look older than your grandma's stories. Your nostrils burn from the frying smoke, but you're grateful it's not crocodile dung this time. Remember that sunscreen? We'll get back to that later. Meanwhile, the frying fat thickens and crackles, bubbling like a witch's cauldron. A nearby woman drops in thin slices of root vegetables, which fry up crunchy and golden. She calls it a treat, but it looks suspiciously like your garden's leftover scraps, transformed by magic. This frying technique wasn't just for savory treats. Sweet fried delights existed too, though sugar was still a precious commodity mostly reserved for the wealthy. Instead, cooks used honey, a sticky, thick substitute that sometimes fermented into mead or vinegar if left too long. The result? A sweet and sour glaze that stuck to your fingers and teeth. The bruise with nicknames you don't say too loudly. You lick your fingers, hoping no one notices, and consider how frying brought joy to medieval meals. It was a gamble with fire and fat, a little rebellion against boiled gruel and bland porridges. Cracked. This one's bitter, she warns, but less likely to melt your insides. You take it without question. Then, a man with a scarred face and a mischievous grin offers you a sample of something fried and mysterious. Try this. It's a real treat. You take it. The first bite is crunchy, then salty, then strangely sweet. You ask what it is. He smirks and says, "It's moments like this that remind you how wild medieval cuisine could be. The mix of ingredients that make you scratch your head and smile. The culinary experiments born out of necessity and curiosity. As the sun sets and the frying slows, before you step away, you glance at the frying pan again. The fat bubbles, the smoke curls into the twilight, and somewhere in the distance, a bard sings a tune about a knight's lost helmet. All around you, the smoky scent of fried junk food lingers, a reminder that even in the darkest medieval nights, people knew how to enjoy a good. The sweet, spicy scent of candied fennel seeds drifts lazily through the air, catching your attention like a whisper from another world. You follow it to a small wooden cart draped in faded fabric, where an elderly woman sits, her fingers deftly rolling. Sugar wasn't just sugar back then. It was a luxury so rare and precious that eating it felt like a mini celebration. You probably won't survive this history lesson without at least one toothache. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, drop your location and local time below. I'm curious where you're sneaking in this sweet medieval journey from now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. You chew thoughtfully, realizing that sugar then was far from the refined white crystals you find in modern kitchens. Instead, It came as raw lumps of unrefined rock sugar, brownish and gritty, often mixed with honey or spices to stretch its preciousness further. It was imported mostly from the Middle East, traveling perilously across trade routes crowded with bandits and bad weather. But also frequently fatal. The wealthy elite could afford entire cupboards filled with candied fruits, spiced syrups, and sugar sculptures shaped like animals or mythical beasts. The very sight of sugar was enough to impress guests at a feast, where lavish dessert you can almost hear the murmur of scholars debating whether medieval sugar consumption was more medicinal than indulgent. Some believed sugar could balance bodily humors, ward off disease, or even act as an aphrodisiac. Others suspected it was just a cost, but what about the common folk? For peasants, sugar was basically a fantasy. Instead, they had access to honey, a sticky, golden substitute harvested from local hives. Honey was treasured for its sweetness and supposed healing property. You watch a small child gnaw on a honey-soaked biscuit, their fingers sticky and their smile wide. The biscuit is dense and crumbly, made from coarse grains, and you realize that sugar didn't always mean refined and perfect. In addition to sweet treats, sugar and honey were key ingredients in medieval spiced drinks called cordials or possets. These were warm, thick beverages combining honey, wine, and herbs meant to comfort and cure. You imagine sipping one by a hearth. But the real showstopper was the candied fennel seed, a favorite palate cleanser after heavy meals. The seeds were boiled in sugar syrup until translucent, then dried and tossed in. There's a quirky side to this story. Some recipes for candied seeds included rosewater or ambergris, a waxy substance from Wales, both of which sound more like perfume than food. Eating them was an aromatic adventure bordering on alchemy. Never saw her again. Historians still argue whether medieval candied sweets were consumed primarily for pleasure, medicinal purposes, or as status symbols. It's a debate sweetened by centuries of incomplete records and the occasional burnt sugar pot. So instead, you try again. You try a few more candied seeds and realize that while medieval junk food might have been gritty or greasy, it also had moments of surprising refinement. Sugar was the rare sparkle in an otherwise humble diet, a sweet rebellion against and yet it's a sweetness with a dark side. Overindulgence led to tooth decay, and sugar's price kept it out of reach for most. You smile, wondering if medieval dentists ever cursed candied fennel seeds as much as you now regret biting into that gravel-filled pastry earlier. In this sugary world, you take a final bite and let the licorice warmth fade. Ready to dive deep, the scent shifts now. No longer sweet, but something earthier, muskier, with a faint whiff of something you're not quite sure you want to identify. You find yourself drawn toward a low stone building. Fermentation was everywhere back then, not just in your fancy wines or ales, but in everyday staples. It was a vital preservation method before refrigeration existed, turning perishable foods into tangy, sour delicacies that could survive the long, cold winters. You start to understand that fermentation was not just a culinary practice, it was a chemistry experiment performed by intuition and tradition. The woman scoops out a handful of cabbage, drenched in cloudy brine, and hands it to you. Historians still argue whether fermentation techniques were independently developed across Europe or spread from a few central hubs. The truth is likely a mix, with each region adding its own spin based on climate, available ingredients, and cultural preferences. From within Dot, you wake sobbing into your pillow. You're still pregnant, Dot, and the porcelain cup lies cracked and empty on your shelf, like a useless charm. Fermented foods were vital sources of nutrients, especially vitamin C, which helped stave off scurvy, something sailors and peasants alike would have appreciated. Yet the strong odors and sour flavors were often seen as a sign of poverty by the upper classes, who preferred their meats roasted or boiled with milder seasonings. But here's a quirky detail. Some medieval recipes called for fermenting more unusual items like fish guts, or grains soaked in honey to create pungent condiments and beverages. Think of it as the ancestor of modern-day fish sauce. You try a sip of a thick, murky drink that looks like cloudy cider but tastes like vinegar soaked in old bread. The woman calls it switchel, a medieval energy drink of sorts, made with fermented grains, honey, and herbs. It was popular among laborers needing a pick-me-up, but you suspect it also made some folks grimace. Beyond the everyday, fermentation also had spiritual and medicinal significance. Monks in monasteries carefully tended their barrels of mead and pickles, believing that these foods purified the body and soul. Some even claimed fermented foods could cure ailments ranging from indigestion to melancholy. All of it calculated. The stench of fermented fish called garum wafts in from a nearby stall. Garum was a staple Roman fish sauce carried into medieval kitchens, made from fermented fish guts, left to rot in the sun until it became a pungent liquid seasoning. You wrinkle your nose, but admit it probably added a punch of umami to otherwise bland dishes. There's even a legend that some nobles used fermented products as aphrodisiacs or perfumes, though historians still argue whether this is fact or just medieval gossip. Either way, it paints a vivid picture of a world where the boundary between food, medicine, and magic often blurred. You know it's both. You notice the woman dipping chunks of stale bread into the fermented tub, creating a kind of sour soup or porridge. It looks unappetizing. But locals swear by its restorative powers after a long day in the fields. Worn them in years, but she keeps them like relics. You pause and reflect on how fermentation is both a survival tactic and a flavor revolution, turning basic ingredients into complex delights and pungent mysteries. It's the original slow food, one batch at a time, evolving over months. As the sun sinks lower, you find yourself oddly comforted by the sour tang still lingering on your tongue. Fermentation may be stinky, strange, and occasionally revolting, but it's also a testament to medieval ingenuity and the timeless human urge to make the food last and taste interesting. The market's rhythm hums softly around you as you wander past stacks of bread piled high on rough wooden tables, their crusts cracked and dusted with flour. You grab a loaf, warm from the oven, and feel the comforting weight of it in your hands. This is medieval bread, not the supermarket kind, but the true staple of the era. You probably, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, let me know your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Bread wasn't just food, it was life itself. From peasants to kings, bread was the center of every meal. symbolizing everything from sustenance to social order. But not all bread was created equal. You hold a dense, coarse loaf baked from rye or barley flour, the grains still visible in the rough crumb. This was the bread of the common folk. Nutritious, the nobility, on the other hand, enjoyed white bread made from finely sifted wheat flour. It was lighter, fluffier, and displayed their wealth and status. Bread was so important that some medieval laws regulated who could bake what kind of loaf. You could say it was the original food class system baked right into your diet. During fan practice, the sash nearly betrays you. Here's a quirky detail. In some regions, bread was even used as a plate. Trenchers were thick slices of stale bread that served as edible plates, soaking up gravy and juices before being eaten or fed to dogs. It's like the medieval version of edible packaging, but with more crunch. Historians still argue whether bread shortages caused major social unrest, or if other factors played bigger roles in medieval famines and uprisings. What's clear is that bread was the heart of the economy and culture, binding communities together over shared meals and rituals. You bite into the loaf, surprised by the gritty texture and slightly sour tang, a result of natural fermentation in the dough. Sourdough wasn't a trendy artisan product back then. It was simply how bread got made. Wild yeast and bacteria worked their magic to raise the dough slowly, giving bread. There were also sweetbreads, often enriched with eggs, honey, or dried fruits, reserved for special occasions and religious festivals. You nibble on a small piece of honey cake offered by a cheerful baker, the sweetness cutting through the usual earthiness of the day's fare. Not to think about the future, about what happens when the sash isn't enough. You pause and notice the baker pulling out a large wooden paddle, deftly sliding loaves into a roaring brick oven. These ovens, often shared by entire villages, were crucial community hubs. Baking bread was a social event, a break from the daily grind, and a reminder that even in tough times, people found moments of warmth and togetherness. In there, you suspect she doesn't even know herself. Here's a little-known fact. In some medieval towns, bread was even used as currency. Bakers and millers bartered their loaves for other goods and services, making bread a literal currency of survival. You glance at the crowd, where a street performer juggles loaves, drawing laughter and applause. It's a reminder that even the most basic food carried layers of meaning, joy, and connection. Pregnant in the eyes of the world. As you finish your slice, you think about the simplicity and complexity wrapped up in every loaf. The labor, the craft, the social codes baked right in. Medieval bread wasn't just food, it was the foundation of life, a humble hero of countless stories. And so, with the taste of crust and crumb lingering, you step onward, wondering what other strange and fascinating medieval junk. You find yourself drawn to the scent of roasting meat, smoky and rich, curling through the crisp morning air like a slow invitation. The crackle of firewood and the occasional pop of sizzling fat punctuate the markets. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's sink our teeth into medieval meat snacks. Your breath, but the tightening in your lower abdomen won't relent. It's a slow, deep ache, different from the usual cramps you've learned to ignore. Meat was an expensive luxury for most people. Hunting rights were jealously guarded by the nobility, and peasants often had to make do with the scraps from the lord's table or preserved meats. But preserved meats, salted, smoked, or dried, were the original medieval junk food you might. One popular medieval street snack was black pudding, a kind of blood sausage made from pig's blood mixed with fat and grains. The idea might make you pause, but it was highly nutritious and cherished for its rich, earthy flavor. Vendors would slice it thin and fry it up, selling it piping hot to passers-by. Oddly enough, historians still argue whether black pudding was more of a daily staple or a festival treat. You nibble a piece, and the rich, slightly metallic taste fills your mouth, balanced by the soft grains and fat. It's a far cry from your typical hot dog, but undeniably satisfying. Another street favorite was pork pies, small, dense pastries filled with spiced pork and baked until golden brown. They were convenient, portable, and hearty, a medieval equivalent to today's handheld fast food. Bakers often, while meat was prized, offal, organ meats like liver, kidneys, and heart, was more common among the lower classes. These parts were often fried or stewed with strong spices and vinegar to mask any unpleasant flavors. You watch a street cook flipping sizzling kidney skewers, the aroma sharp and intriguing. Listening was complicated. For some, a child was a token of loyalty, a living bond, a way to claim something real amid the transient pleasures of the tea house. Others viewed it as a burden, a risk to be avoided at all costs. Medieval taverns were hotspots for meat junk food. Thick slices of bread topped with melted cheese and bits of salted pork formed early versions of what we might now call open-faced sandwiches. These trencher pies, or meat-on-bread snacks, were easy to eat, filling, and perfect for soaking up ale. Speaking of ale, it was the beverage of choice for many, often safer to drink than water. You watch a group of you overhear a scholar debating whether the abundance of meat snacks in towns was a cause or effect of urban growth in medieval Europe. Were these snacks a sign of rising prosperity, or just a clever way for city folk to manage limited resources? Here's another interesting twist. Some medieval recipes include meat jellies. As you wipe your fingers, slick with grease and spices, you realize that medieval junk food wasn't just about indulgence. It was survival, creativity, and social bonding, wrapped in flaky pastry and smoky fat. You step away from the smoky stall. Your appetite, the air thickens now with the sweet smell of honey and spices, mingling with the faintest trace of burnt sugar. You drift toward a modest wooden cart, where a wizened vendor dusts powdered sugar over golden, deep-fried dough that crackles softly beneath your fingers. Welcome to the world of medieval sweets, junk food that tickled the palate and often teetered on the edge of extravagance. You probably won't. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, share your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Sugar was a rare luxury, imported at great cost from the East, making it a prized ingredient mainly among the wealthy. For the common folk, honey was the primary sweetener, a golden, viscous treasure harvested with laborious care. You bite into a small honey cake, It's crumb, moist and fragrant. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval cooks sometimes flavored sweets with spices like saffron or rosewater, lending them an exotic flair that modern cupcakes could only dream of. It was the medieval version of gourmet, but with a pinch of alchemy. Bitter herbal teas you've been forced to drink, but a whisper of dread lingers. Historians still argue whether medieval European sweet dishes influenced early Middle Eastern desserts or vice versa, reflecting the era's complex trade routes and cultural exchanges. And the lanterns still expect your light. You watch as the vendor dips pieces of fried dough into thick honey, then sprinkles them with crushed nuts, an early form of what might now be called fried dough with toppings, a precursor to today's carnival treats. The crunch and stickiness make you smile, but the richness also reminds you why these sweets were often reserved for some. Medieval sweets were surprisingly sophisticated. Marzipan, made from ground almonds and sugar, was molded into elaborate shapes. Fruits, animals, even tiny scenes from courtly life, showcasing the confectioner's skill and imagination. Nobles displayed these edible art pieces. You overhear a heated debate among scholars about whether the popularity of sweets at medieval banquets contributed to early dental problems. Cavities and toothaches weren't exactly a rarity back then. Are connected. Interestingly, medieval medical texts sometimes prescribed sweets as remedies for melancholy or digestive troubles, blurring the line between medicine and dessert. A spoonful of sugar to soothe the soul, quite literally. Street vendors sold simpler treats too: candied fruits, spiced nuts, and small cakes flavored with herbs like mint or anise. The market's sweet corner was a bustling spot of chatter. As you step away, the scent of honey and toasted almonds lingers on your skin. Medieval sweets, like the savory junk foods you've tried, reveal a world where flavor, status, and survival intertwined in the market noise fades into a softer rhythm as you drift toward the cool shadow of a large wooden cart, piled high with wheels of cheese and clusters of nuts. The sharp, tangy smell of aged dairy greets you like an old. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And remember to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's nibble into the medieval world of cheese and nuts. Through, cheese was a dietary staple across Europe, prized not just for its taste but for its durability. Hard cheeses could last months, even years, making them a perfect food for travelers, soldiers, and peasants alike. You pick up a crumbly wedge of cheddar-like cheese, the tang sharp and a little salty, with a slightly gritty. The methods for making cheese varied wildly. Some cheeses were rubbed with ash or herbs, others left to develop a pungent rind that could either delight or repel the unprepared nose. You learn that certain monks perfected cheese-making techniques, turning their monasteries into early dairies famed for particular varieties. Closing around the box like it holds your life, a quirky fact. Some medieval cheeses were so strong-smelling they were nicknamed stinking cheeses, and legend says they were sometimes used as weapons in bar fights. Imagine tossing a wheel of cheese as a projectile. Not the fanciest. Historians still argue whether certain cheeses were regional specialties or spread across Europe through trade and monastic influence. The truth is that cheese-making was a living tradition, evolving with every village and farmhouse dot. Beside the cheese, there are bowls of nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds, the latter often imported and costly. Here's an unexpected twist. Almonds were sometimes soaked and blended into a milk substitute known as almond milk, widely used by those who abstained from dairy for religious or health reasons. You sip a cool glass and find the flavor subtle. Interestingly, some recipes included cheese fritters, where cheese was mixed with flour and eggs, then fried until golden. These were popular snacks, easy to eat on the move and packed with energy. You will overhear a scholarly debate on whether medieval cheese consumption patterns influenced social structure. You nibble on a toasted hazelnut, its crunch sharp and warming, a perfect counterpoint to the dense cheese. Together, they feel like a small, ancient feast, simple yet deeply satisfying. Then hours. Nothing happens. Disappointment curls in your chest, a shadow you can't shake. As you step back, you realize that medieval cheese and nuts were more than just food. They were portable powerhouses, conversation starters, and sometimes even status symbols, all wrapped up in humble packages. You move on with a new appreciation for these old-world snacks. You wander further into the marketplace, where the air grows thicker with the scent of fermented goods, tangy, yeasty, and just a little sour. You find yourself near barrels brimming with pickled vegetables and pots of pungent sauces. This is the mid. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dip into the zesty world of medieval fermentation. Days of whispered concerns and guarded glances. You move through the house like a ghost, light-footed and careful, hiding every wince behind practiced smiles. The ache in your belly pulses steadily, a secret drumbeat no one else can hear. Fermentation was a lifesaver in the medieval diet, especially when fresh produce was scarce during long winters. Cabbage, turnips, and cucumbers were common candidates for pickling, often submerged in brine or vinegar, and left to develop sharp, tangy flavors over weeks or months. You reach for a small jar of sauerkraut like cabbage, its crisp bite refreshing and surprising. Interestingly, medieval cooks also fermented fish and meats, creating pungent delicacies like garum, a fermented fish sauce originally from the Mediterranean, prized for its umami punch. This ancient condiment was the ancestor of modern soy sauce and fish sauce, widely used to flavor stews and soups. Here's a quirky detail. In some northern European regions, people even fermented milk into. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of fermentation was driven primarily by necessity or if it evolved as a deliberate culinary art. Either way, these preserved foods were essential for medieval survival. You sample a dollop of thick fermented turnip relish. Fermented foods also played a role in medieval medicine. Many believed these sour bites could aid digestion and cleanse the body of bad humors, though such beliefs were mixed with superstition. At a nearby stall, you observe a vendor stirring a bubbling vat of mead, a fermented honey drink, sweet but with a sharp kick. Mead was often homemade, celebrated at feasts, and considered both a. You notice that fermentation also influenced bread making. sourdough starters relied on natural yeasts and bacteria, creating flavors you've already encountered in medieval bread. It's like fermentation was the secret thread weaving through many medieval. As you wipe the tangy relish from your lips, you realize that medieval fermentation was a blend of necessity, creativity, and flavor innovation. A way to stretch resources and surprise the palate. You move on, senses tingling with sour memories, ready to explore more curious culinary corners of the past. Pregnancies disappear. Whether through herbal concoctions or more sinister means, the truth remains murky. You step away from the sharp tang of fermented foods and into the warm, fragrant world of medieval beverages, where ale and mead bubble in wooden casks and cups clink in crowded taverns. This is where the medieval junk food experience extends beyond snacks to the drinks that accompanied them, often with surprising ingredients and curious effects. You probably won't survive this spirited journey without a mild buzz in your imagination, but that's part of the charm. You inhale deeply and steel yourself. Whatever comes next, you will face it with the grace expected of you, because that is all you know. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to drop your location and local time too. Now, dim the light. Ale was the everyday beverage of choice for many, favored not just for taste, but because it was safer to drink than often contaminated water sources. Unlike modern beer, medieval ale was generally weaker and less hopped, with a shorter shelf life, but it provided essential calories and hydration. Mead, made from fermented honey and water, was the luxury alternative. Sweeter and more potent, often flavored with herbs, spices, or even fruits. Mead carried a certain mystique, sometimes called the drink of the gods, and was enjoyed at celebrations and feasts. You picture a gilded goblet filled with gold. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval brewers experimented by adding strange ingredients like juniper berries, nettles, or even burnt bread crusts to their brews, influencing the flavor profiles in ways that would surprise modern palates. Imagine your IPA replaced with nettle ale. The shadows and the faint scent of jasmine. Historians still argue whether medieval alehouses were primarily social hubs, fostering community, or places of vice and disorder. Either way, they were central to daily life, often doubling as inns and meeting spots. You watch a group of laborers clinking mugs, their laughter filling the tavern's smoky air. These alehouses were places to unwind after hard work, where tales were shared and deals struck over a pint or two. Were there clandestine networks of midwives and healers, or was each girl left to navigate alone? You don't have answers. Another fascinating medieval drink was small beer, a low-alcohol brew consumed even by children, prized for its nutritive qualities and safety compared to water. It was a daily staple, lightly fermented and refreshing. Wine was also present, but mainly reserved for the wealthy or in southern regions where grapes grew more easily. Spiced wines, infused with cinnamon, cloves, or honey, were popular for medicinal purposes and special occasions. You overhear a debate about whether alcohol consumption in medieval Europe contributed more to social cohesion or to public health problems, a question historians still explore. Interestingly, medieval recipes sometimes called for brewing beer with gruit, a mix of herbs like bog myrtle or yarrow. You take a mental sip, feeling the warmth spread, the social buzz enveloping you. Medieval drinks were as much about culture and survival as they were about flavor. With a last glance at the crowded tavern, you step back into the night, ready for the next chapter of your edible medieval adventure. New cunning dot. And as you rest, the ancient dance of concealment continues, between pain and hope, shadow and light. You leave the warm tavern buzz behind and find yourself on a narrow, dusty path that leads to the medieval street food stalls and the original food trucks, minus the wheels but full of sizzling surprises. These quick bites were the medieval answer to junk food on the go, often greasy, filling, and designed to keep hungry city dwellers fueled through long days. You probably won't survive this. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's bite into medieval street food. Porridge, its warmth grounding you as you plan the delicate balance ahead. Street vendors sold all kinds of fried snacks, small meat pies, crispy fritters, and skewers of spiced meat sizzling over open flames. The smell of frying fat mingles with the dusty streets, a tempting but sometimes overwhelming aroma. You reach for a freshly fried meat pasty, the crust flaky and golden, the filling savory and spiced with herbs like parsley and sage. Servant, here's a quirky detail. Some vendors specialized in unusual offal treats, fried brains, sweetbreads, or even roasted pig's ears. Delicacies for those willing to get adventurous. These were the medieval version of today's exotic food trend, though perhaps less Instagrammable. Historians still argue whether medieval street food was primarily a poor man's quick meal, or if it also served wealthier urbanites looking for convenience and novelty. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You watch as a vendor flips thick pancakes, called cakes or fritters, made from coarse grains and flavored with honey or dried fruits for sweetness. These were popular breakfast items for those on the go. Another, you overhear the clatter of a roasting spit, turning slabs of meat over glowing coals. Meat skewers were often seasoned with spices like pepper, which was a luxury, so street food offered a chance to taste flavors from afar at lower prices. Interestingly, some medieval recipes for fried foods called for unusual fats, like goose or even fish oil, which gave the snacks unique flavors and aromas. Imagine biting into something fried in fish oil today. Inside, you learn to read the subtle language of glances, the hidden messages behind every smile and gesture. You notice a small child licking honey from a stick, a street vendor's sweet treat made from crystallized honey or thick syrup. These simple sugary snacks were accessible to all, a medieval version of the lollipop. With desire, others with something like fear. Pregnancy disrupts the illusion, shatters the fragile construct of fantasy that surrounds a courtesan. You feel the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation just out of earshot. The debate among scholars about street food hygiene in medieval cities remains lively. Did street vendors maintain decent cleanliness? Or did these quick snacks sometimes pose health risks? The answer is unclear, but it's safe to say medieval stomachs were tough. This tale lingers in your mind as both warning and inspiration. You seek comfort in the company of a few trusted sisters, sharing stories and secrets beneath the glow of lantern light. Their warmth is a balm against the cold world outside. You savor the crispy edges of a fried fritter, the contrast of textures and flavors, reminding you that medieval junk food was far from bland or boring. It was a dynamic street experience, full of surprises and variety. With a final crunch, you step away, your appetite whetted for the next curious corner of medieval culinary history. It is said to protect the wearer from harm, a charm against misfortune. You tuck it beneath your robes, a small talisman against the uncertainties ahead. You drift away from the smoky streets and find yourself in the dim, flickering light of a medieval kitchen, where strange concoctions bubble and steam rises from pots full of mystery. This is where medieval junk food gets experimental. Sweet, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's peek into the medieval kitchen. Beneath the lantern's gentle glow, you allow yourself to hope. Medieval cooks loved combining flavors that might surprise modern palates: meat with fruit, spices with honey, and herbs with cheese. Think of a pie filled with lamb, raisins, cinnamon, and almonds. A balance of sweet and savory that defies today's typical junk food. One popular treat was the marchpane, an almond-based sweet paste shaped into fruits and animals, often served at feasts to impress guests. You imagine its dense, sugary texture and delicate flavors. A medieval candy and art project rolled into one. A quirky fact: medieval cooks sometimes included edible gold leaf to decorate desserts or pies, turning junk food into a glittering spectacle, even if the gold itself was tasteless. Of something enduring. Historians still argue whether medieval recipes reflected common tastes or were mainly designed for the nobility, with peasants eating much simpler fare. The reality probably varied regionally and by social class. You notice that sugar was rare and expensive, so sweet medieval snacks often relied on honey or dried fruits like dates and figs for sweetness. Rumors swirl, and the walls seem to lean in closer. You sense the danger tightening like a noose. You begin to prepare for the inevitable, the day when the secret can no longer be hidden. You consult the midwife again, a woman whose hands are both gentle and steady, who speaks in hushed tones about survival and strength. She advises rest, secrecy, and patience. Medieval pies were often heavy on the crust, designed to preserve the filling and act as a portable container. Sometimes the crust was discarded after eating the filling, leading to jokes about coffin pies, where the crust served as a box rather than food. Spices like saffron, cloves, and nutmeg were treasured, used to enhance both sweet and savory dishes. These expensive imports were status symbols, but their flavors permeated even simpler snacks when available. You overhear a debate about whether the medieval palate was more adventurous or conservative than modern tastes. Some argue they embraced complex flavor combos, while others suggest they preferred familiar comfort. You drape it over your shoulders, feeling the weight of its promise. Another unexpected medieval snack was frumenti, a wheat-based porridge, often sweetened and spiced, eaten hot or cold, a kind of ancient comfort food. You bite into a small spiced pastry filled with dried fruit. Savoring the medieval kitchens were places of innovation as well as necessity, constantly adapting recipes to seasonal ingredients, available spices, and social trends. You leave the kitchen, your mind swirling with flavors both familiar and foreign. You drift from the kitchen's warmth into the cool shadows of the medieval feast hall, where grand tables groan beneath platters piled high with curious junk food meant to impress and sometimes confuse guests. You probably won't survive this banquet without feeling a bit overwhelmed by the spectacle, but you can't help but be fascinated. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan. Feasts were about more than just eating. They were performances of power, wealth, and social order. Among the extravagant dishes, you find some of the most elaborate forms of junk food: fried pastries, stuffed pastries, and deep-fried meatballs infused with exotic spices. Some say Benoit's child grew up to become a scholar. Others claim the tale is a myth, a hopeful fantasy whispered to inspire. You cling to such stories as lifelines. One standout was the pasty, or pie, often stuffed with a mix of meats, dried fruits, and nuts, glazed with egg for shine and crunch. You can almost feel the flaky crust giving way to warm, aromatic filling. Comfort food wrapped in medieval luxury, finding solace in its smooth surface and the belief it carries. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval nobles loved subtleties, edible table decorations, crafted to look like animals, ships, or mythical creatures, made from marzipan, sugar, or pastry. These were both junk food and visual entertainment. Historians still argue whether these ostentatious dishes were widely consumed or more symbolic gestures, sometimes left uneaten for show rather than taste. Until the final curtain falls. Because in this world, survival is the finest art of all. You notice that the wealthy often enjoyed heavy use of spices imported from the East: cinnamon, ginger, pepper, and more, that turned simple fried snacks into complex flavor experiences. Alcoholic punches infused with herbs and spices were popular at feasts, mixing honey, wine, and sometimes ale for sweet, warming drinks that paired with rich fried foods. Merchants haggling over tea leaves, the occasional traveler passing through like a fleeting dream. You wonder about your own future, tangled in the threads of uncertainty and hope. Street vendors and common folk had much simpler fare, but at feasts the contrast was striking. The same fried doughs and pastries, but elevated with exotic ingredients and artistic presentation. You overhear whispers about the debates among historians, about whether medieval feasting encouraged excess and waste, or was a vital One surprising note is that some fried foods were believed to aid digestion after heavy meals, though medical advice then was a mix of superstition and early science. You take a slow breath, picturing yourself nibbling a spiced meatball or a honey-glazed pastry under flickering candlelight, the music and laughter swirling around you. Historians still argue about how common such stories were, whether these women were rare exceptions or part of a hidden tradition of resilience and rebellion. You sense your own story unfolding along that fragile line. Feasts, with their sensory overload of flavors, sights, and sounds, reveal how medieval junk food could be both common sustenance and lavish indulgence. You step back from the hall's bustle, feeling a touch more connected to the strange, flavorful world. You leave behind the clatter and chatter of the feast, and find yourself wandering through a quiet medieval market at dawn, where the vendors prepare their goods and curious delicacies, some meant for everyday snacking, others for special occasions, await eager buyers. You probably won't survive this slow, sensory stroll without developing a newfound respect for the art of medieval food preservation, but it's worth savoring. You rise slowly, the silk of your robes whispering against your skin, the jade pendant resting cool against your collarbone. A talisman, a reminder of strength. before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, please share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's explore the market's bounty, followed by time like ripples fading in a still pond. Their courage pulses through your veins, an invisible thread linking past to present dot. The midwife is by your side, steady and calm, a beacon in the storm. Markets were the heart of medieval food trade, where fresh produce mingled with dried fruits, nuts, and preserved snacks, the medieval equivalents of your modern granola bars or jerky. You inhale the crisp morning air scented with fragrant spices, roasting meats, and sweet honey. Pass, you surrender to the rhythm of your body, the ancient dance of creation and loss. There's pain, yes, but also a fierce, radiant hope. Preservation was key to medieval snacking. Smoking, drying, pickling, and salting transformed perishable ingredients into lasting treats. Dried fruit like figs and apricots were prized snacks, portable and sweet, perfect for travelers or children. Here's a quirky tidbit. Historians still argue whether medieval marketplaces were hygienic enough to safely sell prepared foods, or if customers took health risks knowingly. You notice vendors offering conserve jams made from boiling fruits with sugar or honey, spreading sweet preserves on coarse bread for a quick, delicious snack. Drift into a deep, restful sleep. You carry that legacy forward. One whispered breath, one secret song, one delicate step at a time. Meat jerky was another staple, often spiced and dried in the sun or over smoke. You imagine the chewiness and rich flavor, a protein-packed nibble that could last through long journeys. Bakers displayed fresh breads and sweet rolls, some enriched with fruits or nuts, tempting passers-by with warm aromas. Inside, you rest in the warmth of strength born from the hardest of battles. Remember the stories whispered beneath the silk, the courage, the pain, the hope that carry us all through the dark to the dawn. Sleep now, wrapped in the softest of shadows, and wake with the promise of light. Sweet dreams.